Well, here we are again, folks. Another afternoon, another slog through the park. This is going to be a bit of a longer video. It's a bit of a more intense topic, and there was a bit more research went into it. If the Alberta separatists get their way, and we actually move to separate from Canada, there are certain populations in Alberta that will be far heavier impacted than your average guy in Edmonton or Calgary. In particular, Cold Lake, Wainwright, Suffield. To a lesser extent, actually, in some ways, a worse extent, Grand Cache. These three locations all have one thing in common. Their primary driver of employment is the federal government. In three cases, it's military bases. And in the case of Grand Cache, where I used to live actually about 20 years ago, it is a medium security federal penitentiary down at the bottom of the hill. We'll only touch on that one. We're going to focus on the military stuff here. So we're going to start with Cold Lake. That's the base everybody, knows about. It's the most prominent of the three. That's where the CF-18s are housed. I think it's four-wing. I could have that wrong. I'll look it up. Cold Lake is a town. It actually used to be three locations. They were all right next to each other. You had Cold Lake, which is right on the lake itself. You had, oh my, the name escapes me. There was another little town right next to it, and then you had Medley. Medley was where the base was. Medley was the base. And in 1993, that was all amalgamated into Cold Lake. So the population of Cold Lake is 17,815 people total. The largest employer as of 2022, according to the Cold Lake website, was the federal government. 17% of all employment in the Cold Lake region is pretty much attributed to that base. The next largest employer is the oil and gas industry up there at 14%. So on base, you've got roughly 2,000 military personnel. You got a further 300 to 400 civilian employees. And they pegged indirect or induced employment, so that'll be like third-party suppliers, logistics contractors, that sort of thing, at 1,500 to 2,000 jobs. So all told, you're looking at about 4,500 to 5,000 jobs are directly attributed to the base in Cold Lake. And if you apply that, that's a little less than 30% of Cold Lake's population is directly tied to the air base. Now, as far as taxes go, the federal government does not pay property tax for its bases in Canada. What it does is the term is payment in lieu of taxes, PILT. In Cold Lake's case, at least up until last year, they were paying about, on average, $5.1 million a year was the transfer from the federal government to the town of Cold Lake to cover these taxes. That's actually probably going to go up because there was I think it was 2012, the town of Cold Lake went to court because they said the PILT wasn't the equivalent of what they charged for municipal property tax, and that it was putting an unfair burden on the population of Cold Lake. Now, that wound its way through the courts until last year they finally got to the Federal Court of Appeal because Cold Lake won. The feds appealed it. Last year, the Court of Appeal upheld the decision supporting the town. Now, I don't know how long these things take to work out or what the new value is, but that would mean that this PILT for the town of Cold Lake is probably intended to go up. However, if you separate and Canada and Alberta are now separate entities, a couple of things happen. The government packs up and that base becomes an empty parking lot with some empty buildings, and everything that is not bolted to the ground is gone. That PILT no longer gets paid. The military employees are transferred elsewhere. The civilian employees are unemployed. And now you have 1/3 of the population of Cold Lake is either no longer there or they are not working because that employer is no longer associated with the land. When they settled this thing, the mayor of Cold Lake, Craig Copeland, was quoted in the St. Albert Gazette. If Cold Lake were nearly 1/3 in Cold Lake, where nearly 1/3 of the city's land base is federal property, it is important, that federal properties are valued accurately. So, 1/3 of the city's footprint belongs to the federal government. Now, there is no federal government. 1/3 of the city's property just become a massive liability. Because yes, the people move out, they take all their stuff with them. The infrastructure's still there. Now you got a town that just lost a big chunk of its tax base, has to make a decision. Are we going to do the upkeep on 1/3 of our footprint, which is empty and not being used? Or are we going to let it go fallow? Are we going to let it sit there and deteriorate? Because if nobody's using it, it costs money to keep it going. There's still street lights, there's still fire hydrants, there's still buildings that can catch fire, there's still sewage pipes, water pipes, and all of that requires some form of basic maintenance. So it's not only are they losing the tax money, but now they have lost the tax money and they have to continue to pay the upkeep on the infrastructure. I don't know about you, but if I was living in Cold Lake and understanding the relationship and the financial attachment to the base, this is not something I would be interested in at all. It's just, it boggles my mind. You take out 1/3 of a town's population, that town is going to suffer, if not collapse. Suddenly you have way too much infrastructure for the people you have, and you literally are mirroring Flint, Michigan, where the entire population collapses, and eventually you have to bulldoze something because it costs too much to keep it in a safe state unoccupied. The next one we'll talk about, because it would be the next on the list, and a good number of people know about this, Wainwright. Wainwright is one of the larger military training centers. So where I live, we got a small base just south of us here. They go to Wainwright once a year, every 2 years for training. Wainwright does a lot of field training, does a lot of international field training. So it's in a similar position. So Wainwright is a small town. Its population is 6,400 to 7,000. If you add in the MD of Wainwright, you're going to tack on another 4,400. And actually the base is associated with the MD, not the town. So PILT goes to the MD of Wainwright, and currently it's somewhere between 5.5 and 6 million a year. CFB Wainwright has 690 military personnel and then 300 civilian workers approximately. So between the two, you're just over 1,000 employees on the base, which is adjacent a town of 7,000. The next largest employer in Wainwright is the hospital, which employs 230 people. I think the fourth largest employer in Wainwright is Walmart. So it doesn't take a great leap of logic to see what the employment impact will be of shutting down federal access to Alberta in Wainwright. It will also collapse. It might even collapse faster than Coal Lake, because there is no heavy oil and gas industry there to support people. There's not that, the second largest employer is almost as big. No, it's dwarfed. Third one we'll talk about isn't as well known, but it's got its own special impact that will happen if Alberta separates from Canada and they lose access to their federal employer. And that would be Suffield. Suffield doesn't get talked about a lot. As far as manpower goes, it's not a very big base. However, as far as footprint goes, it is huge. It is the largest military training ground in the country. And its particular specialty was CBRN. So you got chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear training. And then they appended terrorism. So that's where the guys go to learn how to deal with things like, dirty bombs or chemical exposures, that sort of thing. Let me check my notes. There's only 225 military personnel on that base at any given time, but they do have a pretty high transition rate. People come to visit to do things, then they go away again. However, that base has 590 civilians. Because of its size and what it does, the civilians on base outnumber the military personnel. The civilians are in charge of doing things like the admin, maintenance, security, and then Defense Research and Development Canada. This is our version of DARPA, right? And DRDC is actually, they have 7 or 8 bases across the country, but their CRBN or CBRN arm of it is in Suffield. So that base is tied to the MD of Cyprus, which is, it's a large footprint, but small population. It's mostly, you're talking ranchers and stuff. So Cyprus has one of the lower population density numbers. I think it actually works out to 0.6 persons per square kilometer. But that base does the water treatment for its neighbors. There is mutual aid and supply agreements between the base and the village of Suffield for potable water and firefighting. So if that base closes, the MD of Cyprus, or the county of Cyprus, county, I think, is going to have to take over running that potable water plant that currently the military runs for them at their own cost. That's going to be huge. That's the three bases. So you can see that if we separate, it's never as easy as they say it's going to be, right? The guy in Calgary who's screaming you should use this as an opportunity to tell liberals to go F themselves, he's not living in Cold Lake. He's not looking at losing 30% of the population of his town. He's not looking at his kid struggling going to an empty school. He's not looking at the fact that all the shops are starting to close because they don't have enough customers anymore to support their business model. He doesn't care. He's in Calgary. So if I lived in one of these towns, I would absolutely be paying attention. Beyond that, if we separate from the Canadian military, this is something else that does not get talked about. In fact, I'll guarantee you, if you walked up to 8 different people and asked them if they knew what Operation Lentus was, they could not tell you. Yet it has a massive impact in Canadian life. Operation Lentus is the Canadian Armed Forces project that responds to states of emergency across the country. And the data I found went back to 2010. So that's at least how long that's been running. So you have an emergency in a province. The province declares a state of emergency. The premier of the province notifies CAF that they require assistance for logistics or transport or whatever it is they need, and CAF responds. Now, in Alberta, they have done that 5 times since they started. So in 2013, the flooding in southern Alberta, Canadian forces came for that to help move things around and get people out of trouble and generally help with logistics. 2016, this is one everybody's going to remember. 2016 was the beast, the fire in Fort McMurray. CAF sent 65 members. They sent 4 CH-146 Griffin helicopters. They sent 1 Chinook and 1 Hercules to help with logistics of getting people in and out of Fort McMurray. They shipped 124,700 pounds of freight. They moved 367 evacuees to safer locations. They carried 173 firefighters in and out of firefighting zones in order to support operations. You people who say your government never does anything to you, I will bet you that there are 367 people from Fort McMurray that disagree with you. 2023, Project Lentus, or Operation Lentus, was again in Alberta to support wildfire efforts. They were here from May 10th till June 19th. The height of the mission, they had 350 personnel deployed in the province, mostly as Class 3 firefighter crews. So the guys on the shovels. In 2024, they were in Alberta again for the Jasper wildfire. And they were here from July 25th until August 8th. Immediately after that, they didn't even get to go home. They were working on the SEMO complex in Alberta. And they were there from August 8th to August 16th. That's what you lose. Because we can't recreate it. Not within a decade. How long would it take to spin up a functioning military with a base population of 5 million? And then get them trained. Get them the equipment. I don't know how much a Griffin costs, but I'll guarantee you it ain't cheap. This is what separation really means. It's not a we can do it better, we can do it cheaper. It's a we're going to throw everything out and do it again. And I got news for you. That never goes as easy as you think it's going to. Because some guy stands up and says, what about Cold Lake? What are we going to do for Cold Lake? When all of a sudden that base is empty. Ask a separatist. Go ask Dave Parker what his plan is for Cold Lake. Because I'd like to know, actually. If anybody can come back with a credible answer as to how you're going to protect these towns that are at risk, I'm willing to listen. I've been wrong before in my life. There is a chance I am wrong now. But you got to convince me. Because when I go looking shit up, I don't see any good side here at all. And then the last one I wanted to touch on was Grand Cache. Grand Cache is special to me. I lived there when the coal-fired power plant was up. I was there for a year. And it's an incredibly beautiful town. Incredibly beautiful, incredibly scenic, and incredibly unfortunate. It used to be its two main stable forms of employment were the power plant and the prison. It has a massive coal mine, but that thing was up and down every year or two. Then the power plant shut down. So all they have in Grand Cache now is a prison. And it's a federal prison. What happens to federal prisons? Is that a separate video or should we do that now? Let's do that now. So we got federal prisons. Grand Cache, one in Edmonton. I think there's another one further south. Federal prisons aren't divvied up by what province you got arrested in. You get assigned to a prison and you go there. So, federal prisoners who belong to other provinces, do they get transferred? They get sent to another prison in Canada? How about Albertan incarcerated people? Do they get transferred to finish out their sentence? Or do we say you're no longer a member of Canada, you're excommunicado, free to go, just don't cross the border into Saskatchewan or BC? What do we do with that? What do we do with the first guy who breaks the law after we separate? Because we have no federal courts. We're not a federation. We have no prisons, no federal prisons. We have local jails, police, provincial courts. But are they set up to handle those cases? I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Anyway, that's enough of our time today. You guys have a wonderful day. I got about 3 hours of editing to get this ready to go. In case you hadn't noticed, I don't do a ton of editing, but it does take time. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.